Hi all, and welcome to the Urban Fix, Resilient Cities. The learning objectives for this session are shown here, and we'll be following up with a survey and with more information on how to receive credit from AIA. We'll collect questions submitted to the Q&A box throughout the session, and if the speaker isn't able to get to your questions, we'll have him answer them in writing and share them on the website after the teach-in. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for this session, Doug Kelbough and Harrison Fraker. After 2 degrees from Princeton University and an active professorial practice, Professor Kelbough, FAIA, served as architecture chair at the University of Washington and then Dean of University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. Author and editor of numerous books, chapters, articles, and essays, he won the 2016 Topaz Medallion, the highest award in architectural education. The Topaz Medallion is an honor our second presenter, Professor Fraker, also shares. After receiving his architecture degrees from Princeton and Cambridge universities, Professor Fraker taught for 15 years at Princeton, was the founding dean of a new College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at University of Minnesota, became the 5th dean of the College of Environmental Design at UC Berkeley from 1996 to 2008, and was a guest professor at the Sustainable Urban Design Program, Lund University, Sweden, over the last 10 years. An award-winning practitioner, author, and committed teacher, he won the 2014 Topaz Medallion. I'll hand it over now.
Okay, I think I'm first, so I'm going to hit share screen and see if this is working. Can you see that, everybody?
Yep.
So that's our title slide, literally with the title of the session and my book and our respective titles as professors and dean emeritus. So believe it or not, Harrison and I did solar workshops back in the mid-19 and late 1970s. Here we are doing one using old-fashioned slide projectors. We're dedicating this talk to Don Prowler, who... What's that?
Full screen, Doug.
Oh, full screen.
Okay, that's probably enough time.
Yeah, there you go. So there we are.
The poll and put the results up on the screen. Here we are.
In the late 1970s, doing a workshop. So we've been doing this for a long time. And Don Prowler, a mutual friend, we dedicate this to. Can I move on?
Yes, go, Doug.
All right, here's the title of the session and my book. That street scene, by the way, is taken by me in Buenos Aires. I know some of you participants might be from South America and perhaps even Argentina. So for me, this journey goes back to a house I designed in 1973 at Trom Wall in Princeton, New Jersey, where Harris and I knew each other, competed against each other, and are still competing against each other. Anyway, that house plus a bunch of other projects is what I'm basing this talk on. A lot of passive solar work, which Harrison has also got great experience in. So cities, a subtopic, is a big focal point. It's where we deal with issues of housing and homelessness and climate change impacts and these other issues you see listed here. Cities are really the focus of where many of the impacts will come to bear. The built environment, especially the city, is society's biggest economic investment. There's nothing bigger. It's one of humanity's most empowering and monumental achievements. So why is it important right now? Here are 3 reasons. One, there's a global tsunami of urban development. This is a slide of Shanghai. It's going on all over Asia and other parts of the world at an immense speed, and it's accelerating. Here we see the percentage of global population that's rural dropping as the percentage of urban dwellers increases, about 6.3 urban dwellers to 3.2 rural residents are predicted by 2050. So we're getting more urbanized. 83% of all Americans live within urbanized areas. And if you look at the 300 largest cities on the planet, they account for about half the world economic output. So they punch way above their weight, with 1/5 of the world population producing 50% of its economic might. People have been moving fast to bigger and bigger cities. This happens to be Mumbai, a city I visited a number of times, an amazing place that now has in its metro area about 20 million people. The second reason is the ecological crises facing the world, but in particular cities, climate change being the leading problem, but a host of other ones not far below it. Here's Boston projected with a 20-foot level sea rise. Logan Airport cannot, on the upper right, cannot be saved, I'm told by someone who lives there. There's flooding. We all know that cities are flooded. Venice is maybe the most famous. And as Ian McHarg, the great landscape architect, said, few among us regret the loss of the ancient marshes on which Venice and Amsterdam sit, the loss of the even more ancient hills on which now seat Athens and Rome. So the point is, marshes are important and we need to protect them, but not every marsh. Some are worth sacrificing, most notably those cities. The related impacts include COVID, and as Harrison will tell you, forest fires in California, migration, particularly across the Mediterranean, and drought. The third reason is global overpopulation. It has exploded in the last 100 years, in particular the last decade or two. The human population reached 1 billion in 1830, and we added the last billion in 11 years. It's astounding the rate at which we're urbanizing. 50 years from now, depending on how much our planet grows in population and on climate change, a recent report says up to 3.5 billion people could be living in places so hot they would be considered uninhabitable today. That's a large percentage of humanity. We've been a bit spoiled coming into this Anthropocene age. We've had 10,000 years of almost perfect conditions for our species to thrive. You can see here how little the temperatures deviated until about 1880. Things started going, about 1940, they really started going up and deviation increased. It's going to accelerate. Our generation, Harrison and I, will do fine, but our kids will have a wild ride and our grandkids will have a horrible ride. If I could show a slide to Trump, a couple of slides, this would be one of them. He keeps saying, yeah, the planet's getting warmer, but then it'll get cooler. We have had that cycle going on every 100,000 years or so for quite a while. But look at the current CO2 in the atmosphere. It's jumped much higher than it's ever been in those previous cycles. So we're in a new terrain. Restraining the average, I'd show him this slide too, restraining average global temperature to the 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial, which the UN recommends, would cost much less than dealing with the damage due to inaction on global climate change. Inaction is 4 to 5 times more expensive than action. Big numbers. You know, a lot of people think the city is like an ecosystem. It's not analogous to one. It is an ecosystem. Human settlements are just as natural as a colony of prairie dogs or this beehive or bird nest here on the right. Ecosystems, unlike organisms, unlike animals, don't have to die. They live for a long time. Think of the ancient cities of Athens, Rome, Beijing, etc. When a bird flies over a city, it doesn't think, oh, I'm over a city now. It sees it as one continuous ecosystem. Which leads me to a major theme of my book, the environmental paradox of cities. When people cluster in dense, mixed-use cities rather than in suburban sprawl, they have a big ecological footprint. There's no doubt about it. Cities have a big eco footprint. But on a per capita basis, per person, the ecological footprint is smaller than in low density patterns like suburbia. So cities may not look as green as suburbia, but in fact, they are greener. As this graph very dramatically shows, the red is what the upper bar is say suburbia. Red is what people spend driving around their vehicles. Purple is heating, cooling, and lighting their freestanding single-family dwellings, and green is the energy spent to actually build the buildings and the embodied energy in all the materials, which exceed the amount of materials in, say, a townhouse or apartment. So if you look at the lower bar, much less transportation because people bike and walk more in a city or any high density area. And they also, because they have shared walls, floors, and ceilings, use less energy to heat and cool themselves. Actually, a little more energy to daylight themselves. But overall, the net impact is much less for building operations. And then it takes less energy embodied in fewer materials to build their smaller units, smaller in square footage, but also within multifamily buildings. So let's look at Atlanta on the left, Barcelona on the right. This is about as dramatic it gets in terms of carbon production. They're both about the same size. Actually, Barcelona is a little bit bigger, but the urban area of Atlanta, you can see, is 4,300 square kilometers versus 162 in the built-up area of Barcelona. And in terms of transport emissions, transportation carbon, Barcelona is 10 times better.
Doug, you're about halfway through your time, just as a heads up.
So here we go. The urban heat island, you all know what that is, I think. It's much hotter downtown than in the suburbs and countryside because of heat from tailpipes and chimneys and more pavement that gets hot, hotter roofs, so on. Large cities in the US tend to be warming at more than twice the rate of the planet as a whole, or their countries, or their rural hinterland for that matter. Global estimates of climate change are likely to underestimate the rates of warming in the very places where most of the world lives, which is in cities. Here are the surface temperatures, red to cool blue across the metro area, but we're lucky, very lucky. Strategies to mitigate and adapt to urban heat islands are consistent with, in fact, identical to strategies to deal with climate change. And because urban heat islands are manageable in 5 to 10 years rather than the 50 to 100 years needed to stop climate change, or at least slow it down, we're not going to stop it. There's a more immediate and palpable feedback. So I think urban heat islands can better motivate and activate people to change their behavior. And how do we deal with urban heat island? Lighter pavement, big difference, 4 to 1 lighter pavement. A white roof, 4 times better than a dark roof. Green roofs are more expensive with plants and so on. But they do other good things, as you know, including growing food and so on, but they're much more expensive. White paint is the cheap way to go. Here's our white roof in Ann Arbor, where we used to live until we just moved to Seattle. White roof and photovoltaics and a circulating water system for domestic hot water. So the second is less waste heat. That means less biking. I mean, more biking, more transit served communities, less auto-dependent cities. Here, any of you in Mexico know that there are some bike share systems. These are actually free bikes that are available in Mexico in the right place at the right time. AC is a big problem. It pumps a lot of hot air into the streets as it cools individual dwelling units. Dwelling units get cooler, the street gets hotter, and the number of AC units is expected to more than triple by 2050. It's the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in every country on Earth, developing countries and the developed world. The chemistry of those is deadly. There are a lot of reasons air conditioning is a problem. Street canyons, which Harrison originally turned me on to, they trap heat. Obviously, the higher the street walls, the narrower the street, the more heat that's trapped. We want to have lighter colored walls on those canyons and lighter colored pavements at the bottom. China, this is Beijing, is thinking about actually tearing down buildings so they'll get more wind sweeping through their city to clean out not only the very visible air pollution, but also just the plain hot air. Ventilating cities may become a new strategy. Lastly, and by far the most pleasant one to talk about is cool microclimates, because everybody loves trees and they do so much. Here's the list, too long to read. They beautify, they produce oxygen, they cool, they have flowers, food, they absorb sound, they actually decrease crime. And in Poland, I read a sign, they soak up nuclear blasts. I don't think so. But they do make these cathedrals over urban spaces. An urban tree grows much, much bigger than a tree in a forest and is 16 times more mitigative of climate change than non-urban trees. And of course, more water is good, evaporative cooling, and the water bounces sunlight right back through our atmosphere all the way to outer space. It never makes the photothermal conversion. It comes in as light, it goes out as light. White surfaces have the same impact. So what can you do? You can eat a plant-based diet. You can avoid air travel. You can live carb-free. You can have fewer children if you're of that age. Here's some other ones. Eat locally. Compost your food waste. Many cities collect composted food waste. Replace a convenient car with an e-bike. I love my e-bike, but I like my road bike, street bike even more. Wash clothes with cold water, hang dry them rather than put them in a dryer, install solar collectors on your roof. Mind the thermostat, very effective. Making the thermostat a little bit lower in the winter, a little bit higher in the summer has a dramatic difference in your energy consumption and your electric bill. Forget beef and lamb. They take 10 times as much energy and water as chicken or pork. I haven't had beef in a long, long time. I'm dying to have a Big Mac at some point. We eat chicken and pork occasionally. So here's a little miracle that shows we still have more than our share of good luck at exactly the same time. When it became clear that we have to stop burning fossil fuels, a wide variety of other technologies for generating energy became available. We're truly blessed. We are lucky indeed. If anyone wants my book at a discount, let me know. And here's Harrison. Am I on time?
Yep. Thanks, Doug. You're on time. Great job. So I need to share my screen now. So stop screen sharing, continue.
Do you want me to?
Let
me hit stop share. Well,
yeah, you got to stop share, Doug.
Well, no, you're okay. You're on.
Okay.
Yep. You go to full screen.
There we go. I'm trying to. Okay. Just a second.
You Berkeley professors are really slow.
I'm trying to set my timer up. Ten minutes. Okay. So I want to follow on Doug's presentation where he talked about the what and why and began to dig into the how. And I want to talk about three concepts. The importance of integrated whole systems thinking, where you find synergies across all of these systems: buildings, transportation, energy, water, waste, food, and the microclimate. I also want to call attention to environmental performance of public space, because it's a really underdeveloped design opportunity. And I also want to call attention to the fact that we can make public space more meaningful if we capture the sensory and aesthetic potential of sustainable systems. So what about whole systems thinking? My experience, very simply, with the eco-bloc in China is you start with transit-oriented development, privileging pedestrians, bikes, and public transit. You use deep energy efficiency, and you use the buildings for PV solar or micro wind on the roofs. And then you collect organic waste, sludge, and green waste, and you can generate biogas, which you can use for multiple purposes. And you can collect and treat wastewater for appropriate uses, gray water, irrigation, or drinking water if you treat it further. There's no silver bullet. You have to do all of these steps. But the wonderful thing is with new construction at the neighborhood scale, you can get to zero carbon. It also makes sense as a retrofit strategy. This is an eco-block project in Oakland, where you use the roofs of existing buildings for PV solar. You use a DC backbone that goes to a flywheel storage. It can charge vehicles because of the deep energy efficiency in the houses. You'd go to one inverter and then it goes back to the houses or to the grid. You collect rainwater for potable water, and you can mine the sewer and treat it so you can change the microclimate of the street. What's wonderful about this project is it's funded by the utility bill savings, so there's no added cost. It's called shared prosperity for low and middle income communities who can't afford these strategies. Also, first generation examples exist on how-to systems. With BOA 1, wind and groundwater heat pump created 100% sustainable. In Hammarby, we learned that waste to energy can provide 25% of the load. In Kroonsberg, wind and cogeneration, 50%. And this wonderful project in Vauban, where you can have efficiency, passive solar, PVs, and organic cogeneration, 100%, actually energy plus. But what's really impressive about these projects is the urban landscape, which becomes a really aesthetic experience, treating and retaining stormwater and changing the microclimate. What's interesting is in the discourse on sustainable urban design, the sensorial and the aesthetic have really been neglected. And you can see how wonderful that is if you take a look at Scarpa's Biennale courtyard, where you have shade and light, you have evaporative cooling and evapotranspiration, you have the sound of the fountain, you have the smell of the water and the greenery, and you get all of this echoed in the reflection of the fountains on the soffit underneath the shading mechanism. It is a wonderful sensory oasis. The problem has been that urban design in the past has focused on the public realm as a formal spatial game, which is fine, also as a social performance and as a transit performance, all modes, and as an infrastructure which has been primarily to hide it and have it be a throughput system. What's been left out is the amazing environmental performance of the urban landscape. It's 13 productive functions. If you look at the first 10, microclimate, air quality, CO2 absorption, stormwater, wastewater treatment, food, habitat, energy, aesthetics, and health, these are really underdeveloped. The last three, recreation, parks, plazas for community and social action, and transportation, are the ones that we focused on. But these other ones are just sitting as a huge opportunity. And it turns out that streets are 35% of the total land area, or 75% of public space, and they're an underdeveloped opportunity for environmental performance just waiting to happen. One of the ways to look at this is not just plan, but to look at the environmental section as the space of environmental performance. And as Doug has shown, it's been a dumping ground for waste heat from air conditioners, for trapping solar radiation, hurting the heat island effect, and collecting waste heat from vehicles. But if you look at it as a whole, the urban section demands building envelopes and the public space as an integrated whole, rethinking all the surfaces and systems. So let's take a look at them. Urban floors can provide all these wonderful eco functions if they're not just plain concrete, and they have tremendous aesthetic potential. The same with green walls. You can have screens, you can have all sorts of ways of deploying these on buildings to shade the buildings, to temper the microclimate, to reduce heat island, absorb carbon, improves air quality, creates habitat, and it has tremendous aesthetic value. Doug has talked about trees. They are truly spectacular because they change seasonally. They provide all of these amenities and these wonderful sensory things: smell, dappled light, changing in the fall, the sound of leaves on the ground, fantastic aesthetic value. They're amazing. And if we really took advantage of the urban forest, we could draw down 10% more of CO2 emissions. We also can have other kinds of canopies that do the same things. They can shade, they can be alive, and they can generate energy.
2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, I want to go down. Here we go. Doug's talked about white roofs. They are the cheapest way to do it. You can also occupy them, which is wonderful, but they can also be used to generate energy. And then, of course, he's talked about the value of green roofs where you can grow food, you can have actual flower growing places, and you can even create a whole new neighborhood community at that scale. So they have a social and aesthetic value. What's really interesting is when you use these systems as a design strategy, and you look at Paley Park in New York, yes, it reduces the temperature 10 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but look at how it creates a meaningful place. We empathize with the welcoming forecourt. We empathize with the enclosure of the room. We love the way in which we can use it in multiple ways. It has environmental performance from shade, evaporative cooling, and evapotranspiration. And the sensory engagement, the sound, the smell, the touch of the materials, the feel on the skin, the dappled light, all creates a meaningful place, which gives us a really powerful sense of atmosphere and character that's memorable. We could also do this if we wanted to completely transform a neighborhood in Harlem by completely remaking the streets, the cross streets, with all of these systems, improving the shade canopy by 70%, and then making a movable fabric over the avenues. And we could lower the temperature by 12 to 16 degrees Fahrenheit. But most importantly, we could make a special place. And you could even do this on cross streets in New York. You could turn these cross streets into a power plant, 18 megawatts of renewable energy, a shading device, which reduces the heat island by 12 to 14. And then you have this wonderful hanging garden, this amazing place, a completely unique spatial type that links the river to the two rivers. So in closing, let me say that unlocking the creative, sensorial, and poetic potential of these sustainable systems is in its infancy, and it could create an amazing new urban design toolbox. And if you want to learn more about it, you should take a look at this book that's coming out in the fall, where Minding the City with New Sensibility for its Latent Potential of Environmental Performance really can create a more sustainable, humane, and meaningful city. Thanks a lot.
Good job, right on time.
Thank you both so much. If you'll go ahead and stop sharing your screen, then we can start the Q&A.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So we've been taking questions into the Q&A box throughout the session, and any that we don't get to, we'll answer in writing and post online. But let's start with this one. What can we learn from the COVID-19 pandemic about how to effectively address climate change and mitigate the harm it causes?
Harrison, you want to take it?
Well, the interesting thing about COVID-19 is, in my view, it has really called attention to all of our assumptions about how we use public space. So suddenly public space, we have to start to rethink how we use it. And this just opens it up to all the opportunities that I've just outlined in terms of improving the environmental performance. You know, it is a huge amount of space in cities, and it has not been carefully rethought.
Thank you. We have a few questions about how to get the discounted book from Sir Kelbough.
Well, I wish I was a sir, but I'm unknighted. Anyway, can we post the address later? It's a long website address.
Yeah.
Yes, we can share that
And
in writing
that'd be great.
when we provide the answers to any questions that we don't get to on the website.
I can also, you know, they can just go to the Oro Editions website for my book and, you know, put it on order.
Great. Okay. I'll make sure that we share both of those links with the audience.
Right.
David Arkin asks, with the growing popularity of cargo bicycles as an alternative to auto ownership, and even more so with electric bicycles, shouldn't bicycle-specific infrastructure have a significant role in these reimagined urban landscapes? And adds, thank you for the inspiring words and images.
I will take a shot, and then Harrison can answer. I have an e-bike. In fact, I used it for a little cargo trip this morning. I went to the grocery store. It's a wonderful way to deal with the hills in a city like Seattle. I can climb the hills, which is difficult on a pedal bike. And I don't have a big cargo one. I just have a couple of saddlebags that I fill with groceries. But of course, there are ones that have big bins, front or back, and they can carry up to 3. I have a picture in Cambridge, England, of a woman with 3 young kids and a dog in the front of her e-bike. Sorry about my phone. It hardly ever rings. So Harrison might want to add to that.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, you know, we have an e-bike and I have my bike. I bike to work. My wife uses her e-bike for errands and so on. I haven't broken down and gotten a e-bike yet. The interesting thing is in some cities, bikes don't necessarily need a separate infrastructure. They can use the existing streets. But in some places where you have the issue of density and a very large volume of people using e-bikes, not unlike what Peter Calthorpe presented earlier today, or if you look at New York City at their bike lanes, then you really do need to design a very careful bicycle infrastructure. And I can promise you that there have been so many theses in schools of urban design around the world that have taken a look at how to really make these work beautifully. And it has to be a really carefully designed network.
Yeah, I'm sure Peter showed these complicated intersections where you have all sorts of different curb activities going on, and then a central lane with either electric buses or electric vans and autonomous vehicles, autonomous shared vehicles, and so on. It's going to change. That takes money, which we're going to have less of in the public sphere, but we're going to see some of that change happening. And Harrison's absolutely right. Cities are already quite well attuned to accommodating bicycles, both pedal and electric. And in fact, every city I go to has bike lanes now. It's pretty universal. Next.
We have a question from Mike Eliason in Seattle saying European development focuses on many of these issues and takes place at a larger and faster scale than the US. How do you see similar models informing urban areas when so much of the development, I'm assuming he means in the US, is piecemeal and market driven?
We probably both have something to say on that. I'll just jump in. European cities from the outset have been built before the automobile was dominant. So they are much more walkable, much more mixed use, much denser, much more pleasant. It was the American cities designed after World War II when the car was dominant, particularly our suburbs, that ruined our metropolitan areas. And Europe, for anyone that's been there, knows just how much finer a place it is to live. People live in smaller units and denser settings and enjoy a very sophisticated and delightful life. I don't know what we're going to do with our suburbs. Retrofitting suburban cul-de-sacs are difficult. Obviously, some malls are being converted into mixed-use centers, but maybe Harrison can elaborate.
Well, I think, again, let me just cite Peter Calthorpe's presentation this morning, where he talked about these incredible wide strip suburban areas where you have huge parking and setback buildings, tremendous amount of underutilized space, and land use that is less and less viable. That these present huge opportunities for densification, and especially in relationship to the streets that could start to accommodate not only bikes, but autonomous public transit. So there is a way to densify in the US these amazing parts of cities. Every city has these things, at least in the US. And then there's a lot to be done in the first ring suburbs. When you get into the outer suburbs, it's much more complicated. But I urge you to take a look at Ellen Dunham Jones's work in Retrofitting Suburbia, not only the first book, but their second edition, which looks at all sorts of ways in which you can densify and create nodes in the suburbs that are more complete, more mixed use, so you become less car dependent.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. It's an excellent book. In fact, that slide comparing Barcelona and Atlanta is from one of her books.
Yeah. The other thing is, electrifying, which is what Ed emphasized this morning, that we have to get rid of all of the gas and all of our gasoline cars. Electrifying transportation and electrifying heating and cooling in buildings is what we really have to do, which means we just have to up the renewable generation of electricity. If we don't do that, if we electrify cars and electrify our houses, but continue to generate it with the electricity with fossil fuels, we haven't really solved the problem.
Thank you.
Hey, by the way, on the e-bike question, Pony, I was going to get a second e-bike for my wife, and then I realized, why don't we share it? You and Molly should share one. That's the way to save even more energy.
Yeah, that depends on whether your wife likes to allow you to rearrange the way she set up her bike.
Ah.
Well,
we are different sizes.
That makes sense. We've got 1 minute left, so we'll just answer this next question quickly, and we can finish answering it in writing and post it on the website. So the last question is, any examples of how to finance the transformation of public streets? Cities are strapped now, particularly with COVID impacts. We need ideas on how to accomplish these transformations.
So in my book, I talk about if I was going to design a Green New Deal, I would have a big piece of the investment be on in the public space of under invested neighborhoods, and to use local manpower to remake these streets and spaces. This would be the kind of investment that would start to address some of the structural inequities and really solve, these neighborhoods are really going to suffer under the urban heat island. And this is a way to make an investment that is a win-win-win across the board. But it will take public money to do this. It needs to be a public works type project.
Are we out of time?
We are just about out of time. So with that, we'll conclude the session, but thank you so much, Doug and Harrison. And if you are subscribed, if you registered for the morning keynotes, you'll get an email alerting you when the extended Q&A is published online. If you didn't register and just joined via the Zoom link, go to architecture2030.org/enews and register for our email updates, and you'll get all of the resources later, including the links to both of these gentlemen's books. Thank you so much.
Nice to share the session with you, Doug.
Yes. But, and ditto. Natasha, can we chat a bit?
I am on my way to a next session, but Harrison is the host. So until this Zoom line until you get kicked off for the next session starting, you can both remain on the line. And then when you're finished, Harrison, you can press end meeting in the lower right hand.
Yeah, okay, so
So
my
should
question
we
is, will everybody listen to us, or are we still on?
Or no, we should, I'm thinking about typing answer or answering these questions live, or was there are a couple unanswered questions? Can we do that?
I don't know.
I guess we lost her.
Yeah, we can't get the questions.
I don't know if people are still with us, so I don't know whether we could type some answers. You want to try that? The pavement thickness is an important mitigation strategy in addition to color. It's true that you want a good thick pavement to hold the heat.
The people say they're still listening, so they can still hear us.
So cool. How many people does it show?
I have no idea.
101. It is true that the darker the pavement or rooftop, the better, but the thicker the pavement, the better, because it will hold heat longer and radiated into the nighttime air, which is cooler. And the more you absorb of the excess heat in the daytime that can be taken by a flywheel effect into the evening and night, the better. And the more mass you have, the thicker the mass, the longer you can store the heat and relieve hot temperatures in the daytime.
So, Doug, on that point, one of the interesting things about having movable shading of public space using, these fabric awnings, you shade it during the day so the materials do not get hot and re-radiate at night and keep the heat unbearable during the evening. But if you open it at night, then all the materials see the dark and cold night sky.
Right.
So the space cools down. It's just like passive cooling.
Yeah, and if you live in a hot, arid area where there's less humidity in the air at night, the radiation is even more dramatic to the night sky.
Yeah, because
some of you in parts of America, north and south, certainly live in those kinds of climates. Yeah, radiated night cooling, very effective. There's a question here about, does the UHI, the urban heat island, affect partial, what is this? What are the positive impacts of the urban heat island on decreasing heating loads and consequently decreasing? Well, if we react and address urban heat islands, we are dealing with CO2 reduction. I wouldn't say UHIs are a cause of global climate change, but they aggravate it because they.
No, I think the question was in the winter when you want the solar radiation, the solar gain, the passive gain, the warming of the not only the microclimate but the buildings. So you need to, orientation is critical. How you do your urban canopy is critical. On how you optimize that. So,
it's true. In fact, the mass of cities has a more beneficial effect in the winter than it has a negative effect in the summer. Overall, the thermal mass and the absorptivity of solar radiation has a greater positive impact than negative impact over the course of the full 12 months, depending on whether you live in a strong seasonal climate. But in much of North America and much of South America, that would be true.
Yeah.
So we like that urban absorptivity.
Yeah. But we do want to shade it in the summertime, so that it really becomes, how do you? It's the same idea. How do you dynamically manage the environmental performance of the public space.
So Harrison, you had those beautiful images of the streets, the cross streets of Manhattan with the high shading devices with collectors and the vines and so on. You said 18 megawatts. Is that per street? And
Per
roughly
street.
how big is 18 megawatts? Is that
Well,
like
100 megawatts is, you know, a huge.
I mean, is it the equivalent of one coal-fired power plant? What are we
Yeah,
talking?
yeah, a small coal-fired power plant.
What, 100 is or 18?
100 is.
Yeah,
So
so one
if you did,
3 or 4 cross streets,
yeah.
and it's like eliminating a power plant.
So in rough estimate, that power plant, one of those cross streets, would power all of the activities along it. It becomes a self-sufficient street.
That'd be great if they did a prototype and built it, tested it.
So you should know, I never put it in, but you know, in the Oakland Eco Block project, we looked at putting all these collectors on the roofs as a community solar system. So they don't go through the house, they go to storage first and get processed and then back to the houses. But the roofs are in such bad shape in these low to middle income neighborhoods that we've looked at actually putting the collectors over the sidewalks and making an arbor on either side of the street as a way to do this.
Yeah.
And we may end up actually building that.
By the way, we have a roof here in Seattle we're about to put collectors on very soon. And the ones in Ann Arbor I showed with a white roof, we don't have to deal with batteries. The nice thing is most utilities have reverse metering, net metering. So you don't have to store it. When you have excess solar gain in the summer, which is typical in places like Michigan and Seattle, you get a credit on your electric bill that's applied in the winter when there's not enough solar. So batteries and on-site storage of electricity, which is a complex, expensive investment, need not happen in most cities with most utility companies.
Doug is right about that. And all of the first generation neighborhoods that I wrote about in my book on the hidden potential of neighborhoods, they use the existing utility as the storage. They don't have any on-site storage. The problem is that if we start having a lot of local solar generation, storage really helps the demand load of the utility, which is why we're going to try it in this little block in Oakland, because we now have this new technology that you just stick this vacuum flywheel storage in the ground, and you don't have all the chemicals, you don't have batteries.
Yeah, ultimately we have to have storage because the reverse net metering, whatever you want to call it, utilities offer, will only last as long as they have excess.
Yeah, right.
Load. But at some point, all the utilities are going to run out of that ability and that need that they will no longer offer net metering, and we'll have to do local
storage. Yeah. I think maybe, Doug, we should get off.
So we bid you adieu.
We bid you adieu. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.